Tess from Ruby Tuesday Art, and today I'm going to be painting one of my watercolor coloring in sheets. So I've got some free downloads for you and also another tutorial that you should watch before this one. So if you haven't got your sketch ready on watercolor paper, I recommend you go back and watch my video about transferring an image from normal photocopy paper onto watercolor paper. I'll put a link to that in my video description, but go watch that tutorial, get your image ready on watercolor paper and come back so that you're ready to go. So what I'm going to be doing is just painting for you one of my coloring in pages so that you can watch what I do, get some ideas and just sort of see how it's done. But I don't want you to feel like this is prescriptive or anything, because you can literally do whatever you want. You can choose whatever colors you like, use any techniques that you like. I'm just showing you how I do it to give you a bit of an idea if you're not sure how to get started. And I would actually really love to see your finished pieces, so you can tag me on Instagram. I don't know if I can work out how to flash my Instagram handle on here, but I'm at Ruby Tuesday Art. And let's see if Will can put it on here for you too. Cool. Alright, I am going to be showing you how to colour in one of my illustrations that I have got actually printed onto watercolour paper. So we're colouring in with watercolour. And if you're not sure how to get the illustration onto watercolour paper, I have a tutorial just about that. So go back and have a look at that. Once you're ready, come back and watch this and paint with me. Now you might notice that some of this illustration is already painted. That is because of a technical error that I had with my phone filming earlier. So please bear with me, but that's okay. So just know that yours won't come out looking like this to start off with. That was probably 5 minutes worth of painting, perhaps. But yeah, we'll jump into it. I also have a video just about materials and a free download guide also about materials. So if you're wondering about any of that, that will be linked in the video description. But before I get started, I will just tell you that I have 2 jars of water here, one for cool colors and one for warm colors. Today I'm using my tube watercolor paints that I've squirted into this palette. I've let them dry and then I'm adding water back into them. And I've got a Princeton size 6 snap brush and some paper towel. So let's get started. You'll notice that I have painted sort of odd leaves. That is because if I started painting 2 leaves next to each other and they touch, for example, this one and this one, if I was painting this one here while the one next to it was still wet and they touched, the paint and water would bleed and spread between the two. All right, so I'm using quite a warm green, which I'll show you on here. Excuse the mess. People don't normally get to see my palette. But yeah, I've got a pretty warm green here that I'm going to be using because gum leaves are kind of yellowy brown. All right, so these other leaves that I've painted are actually dry. So I'm going in and painting some of the leaves that are next to them. And it's completely fine if you have bits that you miss. For example, you'll see here, I've got a gap that is left white and that is completely fine. It actually adds a bit of depth and variety. Now I'm actually going to dab in a little bit more of this green down here, and that's actually a wet into wet technique. And you'll see the color spreading through that leaf. Grabbing some more of this green and I'm going to paint this leaf here. And I'm literally just dragging my brush across the page using pretty much just the tip of the brush. If you're using a small brush, you'll need to use more of the belly. If you're using a big brush, you'll just need to use sort of the tip of the brush. But I'm working on A5 paper with a size 6 brush. Now I'm going to go in here and do this leaf Although I've kind of contradicted myself and I had a bit much water on my brush there. I'm working on a leaf that is next to another wet one. So I'm just making sure that I don't let them touch each other if possible. So if you're not as confident as I am, just make sure that you let each alternate leaf dry before you go in and paint next to it. Basically do as I say, not as I do. Here we go. I'm painting this leaf with a really diluted version of the same green. I'm actually going to get some more of it on my brush, a bit more concentrated, and dab it here. And also I'm just going to add a bit of depth here. Again, that's the wet into wet technique. Now I'm going to actually get a little bit of a cooler green that's diluted on my brush. I'm going to test it on here. Have a look. I'm going to use that for this leaf in the background. And I have just noticed that I have got paint on my finger and I'm not sure how long that's been there. But there's always paint on my hands. All right, I'm going to dab in a little bit more. And I'm doing this just for a bit of variety so that there's a few different, there's a few different greens. This is exactly why I said not to do two leaves next to each other, but I'm using it as a really good teaching point. There you go, you can see that the two greens have bled into each other. And you know what, it really doesn't matter that much, but sometimes it can kind of create an effect that you're not really looking for. So just really keep that in mind. Now I'm going to do a brown stem. I've actually got brown on my palette that I'm going to grab. I'm getting a heap of it really concentrated on my brush. And I'm chucking it over here so that I can also add in a little bit of green. To kind of cool that brown down a little bit. And now I'm dabbing the side of the brush and then I'm just going to paint this stem. I actually have a bit much water on my brush again, so I'm just dabbing the rest of it off. There you go, you can see that I've painted the stem. I'm actually going to add a bit more brown in there to make it a bit more concentrated. Okay. So you can see that all the leaves actually look different for various reasons. For example, I used a cooler green here. I used a really concentrated amount of that warm green in this leaf, so it's quite dark, whereas it's diluted here, and you can see where I dipped in some more of the paint and it creates some really lovely variety. So I'm going to let those leaves dry and I'm going to move on to the petals. For the petals, I'm going to mix up a bit of a pinky red, which I've kind of already done here. Although it's more of an orange that I have there. So I'm going to grab my pinky red. I actually can't remember which color this is, but it's pinky red, if you're wondering. So you can choose any color. Have a look at some protea pictures on Google or whatever, or if you've got one in your garden, look there, just for a bit of inspiration. Now that's a really bright pink. So I'm going to add a bit of this darker red to tone it down a bit. But it's going to be pretty bright. Okay. Now I'm going to go in with my pinky red. I'm going to actually just dab the excess off the side of my brush. And like with the leaves, but possibly even more important, I'm going to do alternate petals. So there's one petal done. I'm actually going to dab in a bit more of this color to make it a bit brighter. And we can add shadow and depth later after the painting is actually dried. Here we go, I'm going to do another petal, another one here. This one here. And you'll see I actually am not loading up my brush with any more paint, because as it's kind of getting more diluted and less paint on the brush, that's adding more variety between the petals. And there's a petal back here that I can do without touching any of the others. And also one here. I'm not sure if that's a petal or a leaf, but let's say it's a petal. Alright, so I'm going to grab a bit more of that colour. I'm actually going to get this brownie sort of orange and mix it into for some variety. And just dab that in, just to add a bit of variety within the colour. Because if you look at a plant out there in the wild, you'll see that there's actually a huge range of colours within one petal and that kind of thing. So I'm just dabbing that in. So you'll end up with kind of like a checkerboard effect almost, if you're doing the alternating petals, and then you'll let them dry and fill in the rest. And again, say as I do as I say, not as I do, because for this demonstration I just kind of need to get it done. So dabbing in some more colours for variety. Dry, so I'm going to demonstrate how I will add a bit more shadow and depth to them. I'm going back to my green side of the palette. I'll put some of this warm green over here. To warm it up, I'm actually adding a bit of red. And on my dry petals only, this won't work on wet petals, so only on my dry petals am I doing this. But I'm adding a bit more paint on top, and this is wet on dry technique to add some shadow. Now I've got to remember which ones are dry from earlier. It's all drying pretty quickly today anyway. And I'm actually going to get some of a cooler green and mix that up. Again, for some variety. And you'll see that in some cases I'm going along the side of the leaf, in some I'm going along the bottom, and I'm just sort of making up where the shadow would be. Or if it's a leaf behind everything else, I might add a bit more. For a bit more depth. These have almost dried, so I am adding a bit more colour on top here. A way that you can speed the drying process up is actually with a hairdryer. Just not too high, or it'll blow away. Okay, and I'm actually going to add some depth to my stem as well by adding some more of that brown that I mixed up earlier, just along the side. And look at that. That is a protea illustration coloured in with watercolour. So once it's dry, you could even add in more detail by adding the veins in the leaves and that kind of thing. And that could either be done with a really small brush and get your paint really concentrated on the brush and just sort of painting up the middle, making sure your hand is nice and wobbly so it's not too perfect. Or you could even use a pencil or a fine liner to add those details. So I would really love to see what you do with these printouts. So if you could tag me on Instagram at Ruby Tuesday Art, that would be amazing. I really can't wait to see your work. Thanks.